the European Commission has recently proposed to change EU legislation because of Nord Stream 2 project. What changes will it take place, and does it mean that the EU has realized the risks of the project and the need to stop it?
Let me start with the second questions you're putting. You can argue whether there is a risk or not. And in the EU, we have two different schools of thinking. One says we will depend too much on Russia, which causes some security issues, and it will also undermine the stability and the revenue source of Ukraine. While others say it is good to have trade, it's good to have trade because then you speak, and as long as you have commercial relationships, it's usually good for stability. And actually, the Russian gas is helpful, and it comes into a very liquid market, which is Western Europe, and actually there is no problem. So we have two different views which are not reconcilable, and this is also where the European Commission is trying to find some solution out of this. Now, what this proposed, and it's important to see that this is a proposed change to the third package means. It means that certainly for the future, we will not have this kind of issues that there are different laws applying to different pipelines, depending whether they come from the south, west, east, or north. So that will be harmonized. Now, whether this actually will work then in the end for Nord Stream 2 is still an open question. It depends in the end of the outcome from the negotiations or the discussions on this package or the proposed proposal by the European Commission. You can imagine that these discussions will continue for quite a long time. Decision-making processes take their time. And also it will all depend what then finally will be in the agreement. And you can imagine that you can find a lot of compromises or reconcile different positions by changing definitions, what is existing, what is future, and this kind of stuff. So, it is a proposal, but the final outcome may look very different.
But besides that, what is the European Union doing to reduce its dependency on Russian gas, and how effective are their efforts? What do you think about that?
Now, let me start a bit differently. There are some member states saying we need to reduce the dependence on Russian gas. Other member states have a different view. And I think there is something to be said about this. The Russian gas from Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 as well goes into the Western European market. And that Western European market, which makes up 80% of the Europeans' gas demand, of the EU gas demand, that gas goes into a very liquid, competitive market. There is competition with Norwegian gas. There will be competition with LNG from the US, Qatar, or wherever you want it. And there is competition with various North African sources and other sources, partly through to LNG. Now, we have also gas-to-gas competition. So the gas from Nigeria is competing with the gas from Algeria, which is competing with the gas from Russia, which is competing with the gas from Norway. So, the Russian gas will find its share if it's competitive. And, therefore, the moment Russia is playing games on this, obviously people will just say we take the other gas. And so you can have a question whether there is a gas security issue in the western side. Now, the difference is in the eastern side of Europe, where you have still a lot of bilateral, more or less, relationship between Gazprom and national gas companies in these countries, where there is no alternative source. The moment you have alternative sources also in the east, which is going to come, among other, by the CSEC process, which is the Central and Eastern European Gas Connectivity Initiative, or by what is currently happening in terms through the gas interconnectors which are being designed and built.
And how has German support for the project changed since the Social Democrats, who were previously the junior partner of Merkel-led coalition, went into the opposition?
Um, uh, Let me say, there is always this assumption that this is a German government, Mrs. Merkel and the Social Democrats, and I guess you refer as well to Gerhard Schröder, support of this. But when you look at what was said, so far there was no explicit statement by the Chancellor. We really wanted what the Chancellor was saying is this is a commercial project, which you can accept or not accept, but that is what she's saying. And it brings gas to Germany, it brings cheap gas to Germany, and it makes Germany more secure. And as Germany is interconnected with all the other countries in the European Union, that gas, once it's in Germany, flows freely across the borders, also to the Ukraine. And this is a good thing. It's commercially viable, and it's not a bad thing for security of supply. Now, obviously, such big projects will not be done if the government is opposed to it. Obviously, the German government is not opposed to this. And to what extent then the Social Democrats have been actually supporting this is also not that clear. Now, and that is interesting now, what the new proposal by the Commission does, it will require from the German government in the future to give that gas, if it's adopted, if the proposal is adopted, it will require from the German government to give the pipeline an exemption. And that means the German government will have to decide explicitly and saying we want it, and therefore we give this exemption, so we make a legal move. And if we don't want it, we don't give it. So the German government will have to take a decision, and it will not be able to hide behind the fact this is a commercial project. We don't care because we are a free trading nation, and if people bring gas on the basis of a free trade into the market, we agree to this. And that may trigger, it's very difficult for me to say at the moment, but it may trigger a debate in Germany because there are also people in Germany being opposed to that project. It's not something like the whole German public is aligned behind this project.
But still, there is the other side of the problem, and this is still the question in Ukraine. Why is Germany, who supports the sanctions against Russia, is still in favor of the Nord Stream 2 project, which the route of which passes over the Central Eastern Europe and could leave Ukraine as a gas transit country without earnings?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there is an issue of the earnings. And, let's be honest, a lot of the debate, also from the Polish National Oil and Gas Company, was about the transit fees earnings. So if you take the logic that this is a commercial project, then, of course, the gas will flow where it's the most economic. So that is a logic which is inherent in if you take it as a commercial project. Yes, there will be revenues which used to be for the Ukraine going, and for Poland, which might be going now to the operators of Nord Stream 2. That is the case. Now, whether this creates security issues, that is another point. Will it destabilize the Ukraine? We can discuss this. I'm not a foreign policy expert. Will it cause problems to Poland? I don't think so, except that the revenues are not coming. And of course, to be honest, a lot of these gas discussions is about, revenues, about making money. We import and export and trade gas based on market, which means also making money.
And the last question, how do American sanctions influence the Nord Stream 2 project? Could the US have a strong impact on that, considering the fact that Russians paid American lobbying companies to discourage the sanctions against Russia?
It is a very difficult field. There has already been the possibility, there would have been also the possibility already by the Obama administration to put sanctions on this. Now, what the new regime, which is in the Senate, has been proposing, that this is not just done by the president, but it will have to go through a Senate procedure. So it is not yet clear how this will work. Now, one thing is clear, that the US has serious security concerns. The US Senate, what President Trump thinks, we don't know. You mentioned it. You know, it's not yet clear what his relationship to the Russian government is. But the Senate may come to the conclusion, we don't want this project because it is creates some security issues. They may also come to the conclusion that we don't want this project because it might undermine eventually the export of cheap US gas. That may be also the case, but it is very hard to say at the moment, you know, whether there is a security-driven, whether there's a commercial. Probably it's both, but it's not clear on what side of the equation in the end it will come out.
Okay, Christian, thank you very much for your explanations.